Some wounds aren't meant to be solved, some hearts don't need to be fixed. They just need to be seen. Not explained, not repaired, just held. By someone who doesn't flinch when they see the cracks. By someone who stays even when they know they cannot rescue you because they were never here to fix you, only to love you exactly as you are. The first time I saw them, I didn't know I was breaking. I didn't know how much of me was held together by the quiet grip of pretending. But they saw it not with pity, not with urgency, just with eyes that didn't turn away. They sat beside me, without asking if I was okay, and that's how I knew they were different. Used to believe love looked like rescue, like someone bursting through the fire to carry you out, but they taught me love could look like this soft, still patient, a presence. Instead of a solution, they didn't try to name my pain, didn't ask for a backstory or a reason. They let silence be enough. And somehow that silence held more comfort than 1,000 words ever could. We met on a Thursday, at a cafe that smelled like burnt espresso and forgotten time. I was reading the same line over and over again, trying to convince myself. I was focused, trying to pretend I wasn't coming undone. They asked if the seat beside me was taken. I shook my head, and that was all. It took for the next hour. We sat in parallel quiet, sipping warmth from ceramic cups, letting the world outside grow blurrier with every sip. And something inside me, something brittle, stopped trembling. They didn't ask questions, they didn't need to, they just let me be. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't performing my pain. I was just there, unfixed, unfiltered. Still somehow worthy of being seen. Their name was Jules, not Julian, not Julia, just Jules, like a breath of wind that didn't need a shape to matter, like someone who had lived inside softness long enough to know its strength. We didn't exchange numbers that day, didn't make promises to meet again, but 2 days later, there they were, at the same cafe, at the same table, with the same kind eyes and the same gentle stillness that felt like a lifeline. I didn't know it then, but they would become the friend who saw every jagged edge of me and never once reached for a file to smooth it down. They would become the proof I didn't know I needed, that I could be loved in my not debt, in my messy, in my halfway healed. I remember the first time I cried in front of them. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cinematic, it was quiet, a single tear that slipped down my cheek before I could stop it, and without a word, Jules slid their hand across the table, palm up, waiting not to wipe the tear away, not to hush me, just to let me know they saw me, and I didn't have to carry it alone. Not that time, but I never forgot the offer, never forgot how it felt to be given space instead of solutions. Weeks passed, like warm breath on glass. Soft, fleeting, real. We kept meeting, same cafe, same table, sometimes in silence, sometimes in soft stories that asked nothing from each other. I began to notice the way they listened, with their whole body leaning slightly forward, breathing slower when I spoke, never interrupting, never searching for the right words to fix what I was saying. They didn't treat my pain like a problem. They treated it like a language, one they didn't need to speak to understand. There was a day I nearly disappeared again, slipped into that place I sometimes go, the place where everything feels muted, where laughter becomes too loud and joy feels like an accusation. I didn't plan to go to the cafe that day, but my feet took me anyway. There they were, already waiting. A coffee in one hand, a second cup, untouched, like they knew I'd show up even if I didn't know it. Myself, they looked at me with no surprise, only softness, and slid the second cup across the table. No words, just presence. That is the thing about people like Jules. They don't save you, but they stand quietly at the edge of your shadow until you're ready to walk out into the light yourself. They told me once, I don't want you to change. I just want you to see how worthy you are, even like this. And I believed them, not all at once, but slowly, like dawn breaking behind closed eyelids. The way they saw me taught me how to see myself, not as broken, not as too much or not enough, just as someone trying, and slowly, without effort, without pressure, I started laughing again. Real laughter, the kind that bubbles up from somewhere deep. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. It surprised me how easy it felt, how safe I felt with them. Not because they made my pain disappear, but because they never asked it to. They let me carry it, they walked beside me as I did, and when I faltered, they never rushed me forward, never looked back with impatience. They just waited, held space, and reminded me that love can be soft and still be strong, that friendship doesn't mean fixing it, means staying. It means choosing someone even when they're kids, even when they're kick. You mean they're still figuring themselves out, handing that they gave me something more powerful than rescue. They gave me a place to land without expectation, without repair, just love. They say time heals, but I think it's people who do not with grand gestures or perfect words, but with quiet, with presence. It's with the kind of patience that doesn't tick like a clock, but breathes like a promise. Jules never hurried me, never nudged me toward healing. They let me unfold at my own pace, in my own rhythm, even when I moved backward, even when I froze. There were days I said nothing, and days I said too much, but Jules was always the same, steady, gentle, unmoved by my storms, like an old tree that doesn't flinch when the wind screams through its branches. Remember one night, the sky bruised purple and gray rain, tapping the cafe windows like soft regret. We stayed until closing. Too quiet to be noticed, too still to be asked. To Levi finally told them about the time I broke the real breaking, the one I never spoke of, not to anyone, I didn't plan to. The words just tumbled out, slow, scattered, heavy, each one carrying the weight of a memory I'd buried too deep to hold. And Jules didn't gasp, didn't interrupt. They didn't tell me to be strong or look on the bright side. They just listened, like the story mattered, like it didn't scare them when I was done. They looked at me and whispered, "I'm so glad you're still here. Not it's okay now, not that it's in the past. Just that I'm so glad you're still here." Like surviving itself was enough. Like breathing was worthy of celebration, and for the first time it felt true. I wasn't ashamed of my pain because someone had finally seen it. And Jules had this way of loving that didn't feel like love at first, because I had confused love with fixing, with proving, with earning. But their love didn't ask me to earn it. It didn't arrive with tools or timelines. It just settled beside me like a sunrise, soft, sure, inevitable. One afternoon we sat under the old fig tree by the park, the leaves casting lace shadows over our laps. Jules handed me a notebook, blank, untouched. "What's this?" I asked. They smiled. "Whatever you need it to be." I didn't open it for days, maybe weeks, but when I finally did, my hands trembled, because no one had ever asked me what I needed, only what I could do, or who I could be, or how soon I'd be better. Jules asked, nothing, expected nothing, just offered me space. And that was the first time I began to write again, not to explain myself, not to justify, but to exist, to tell the truth, even if it was messy, even if it was unfinished, one page at a time, one evening at a time. I began rebuilding something inside me, not a new self, not a fixed self, just a gentler one. A version of me that could breathe without guilt, that could sit in stillness and not call it failure. Sometimes I wondered where Jules learned to love like this, who taught them to hold someone without trying to mold them. They never said maybe they'd been broken too, and maybe someone had loved them just the same. That's the thing about people who love without fixing. They've often walked through their own ruins and learned to leave the pieces untouched, to sit among the fragments and find beauty in the way they catch the light. We never talked about forever, never promised anything, but their presence never wavered, and that more than any vow was enough. Began to trust again, not all at once, not with everyone, but with them. And in that trust, I learned something I'd forgotten, that love is not a mirror. It's a window, not a reflection of what you're supposed to be, but a view into who you already are. Jules saw me through that window, and they never flinched, never looked away. And that changed everything. We walked through seasons like chapters: winter with its hollow beauty, spring with its cautious hope, summer with its soft unfolding, and in every season Jules was there. They saw me laugh for real, watch the shadows leave my face one by one, Not because I was healed, but because I was held. Some days I still fell apart. But even then, Jules never rushed me, never tried to tape me back together. They just sat with me, hands open, heart-soft eyes, steady, and in their stillness, I found something I didn't know I was missing. Permission to exist as I am, no better, no worse, just me, that kind of love. It changes you quietly, without drama, without fire. It doesn't burn, it warms. In that warmth, you begin to thaw, to return, to believe again, not just in others, but in yourself, because someone stayed, not to rescue, not to fix, but to love exactly as you are. Jules never asked for anything in return, and maybe that's what made their love so loud. Not in volume, but in weight. It carried, it held. One evening, we sat in silence on the fire escape, watching the city yawn beneath an amber sky. The sun dipped like a secret, and I whispered something I had never dared say aloud. I don't know how to be loved without breaking it. Jules looked at me as if I hadn't confessed a sin, but shared a puzzle they were honored to solve, not with fixing, but with staying. You don't have to protect me from your love, they said, their voice low, steady, kind. I'm not afraid of the way you feel. And just like that, a truth inside me broke open, one I didn't know I'd buried, the fear that I was too much, too complicated, too cracked to carry. But Jules didn't flinch, didn't call my sadness dramatic or my softness weak. They let me feel it all. Without trying to tidy it up, we once spent a whole afternoon doing absolutely nothing, lying side by side on the floor, listening to an old record skip softly between songs. It should have felt empty, but it didn't. It felt full, whole, sacred. It's strange the way real connection makes silence feel like music. I told them about my childhood, how I learned early to quiet my needs, to shrink when I wanted to disappear when I hurt. And Jules just listened, not like someone waiting to speak, but like someone who wanted to carry the story without changing it. Sometimes love isn't about doing, it's about being there, being still, being soft when the world turns hard. Jules knew that without being taught, and I learned it through them, like the way sunlight teaches flowers to bloom. I started noticing small things, the way they made tea, just the way I liked, even when I forgot to ask, the way they never filled silences with solutions, only presence. One night, I cried without knowing why, tears that weren't attached to anything specific, just years of held breath leaving my body, and they held me, not to hush me, but to remind me that my pain didn't need to be justified to be valid. I had always thought I needed to earn rest, earn love, earn the right to be soft, but Jules taught me something radical, that I was already worthy without achievement, without resilience, without pretending to be okay. That night, as I curled beside them, their hand on my back, their breath slow and even, I realized something I hadn't felt in years: safe, not because I was unbreakable, but because I was allowed to break. And I did, again and again, and every time they stayed, not to clean me up, not to call me strong, but to sit in the wreckage with me, quiet, present, unmoving. The first time I smiled, without guilt, Jules noticed, and they didn't say, "See," or "I told you it would get better." They just smiled too, like a secret passed between us, that joy doesn't have to be loud to be really. Began reading books again, walking without headphones, cooking meals I used to love, not because I was healed, but because I was being held in all the places that used to hollow. Jules never pushed me forward, but somehow I moved, not out of pressure, but because their love was fertile. It made growth feel safe. There was a night, a year into knowing them, when I looked at them across a quiet table and said, "I think I'm starting to believe I'm not broken." They smiled and replied, "You never were." And I believed them, not because I felt perfect, but because they had seen me unpolished, unraveled, unfinished, and still called me whole. That kind of love doesn't rescue you. It reminds you of everything you forgot was beautiful inside. We used to chase healing like a destination, some final version of myself that was always out of reach. But Jules showed me that healing is a home you build within yourself, with soft walls and open doors. And in that home, I began to decorate, to breathe, to stay, because someone loved me, not as a project, not as a problem, but as a person and in their love. I learned to love myself not in a perfect way, but in a real way, the kind that shows up even when I don't have answers, even when I still like. That's what Jules gave me. Not a cure, but a hand to hold, a gaze that didn't turn away, a love that stayed, and in staying, they taught me how to stay with myself. The seasons shifted, and so did I, not in sudden bursts, but in quiet rearrangements, like furniture moved in the night, barely noticed. Yet everything felt different. Jules was still there, still soft, still constant, still quietly reshaping my idea of what love could be. There were days when I doubted again, old habits returning like ghosts, the ones that whispered, "You're too much, you're too fragile. You're hard to stay with." But Jules never let those voices speak alone. They would look me in the eyes and say, "You are not your fear, you are not your wounds, you're not someone I'm trying to fix." And I'd breathe again like it was the first time. Sometimes we would walk through the park in silence, watching dogs chase. Nothing leaves drift without purpose, children run without shame, reminded me that not everything needs to be understood to be beautiful one day. In the middle of a quiet afternoon, Jules handed me a small notebook. No occasion, no ceremony, just a gift. Inside was a single sentence on the first page. "I hope this holds the parts of you that no one else asked to see." Didn't cry right away, but later alone I did, because no one had ever invited my unseen into the light like that. Began writing again, not to be heard, but to hear myself, to gather all the forgotten pieces, dust them off. Name them, love them. Jules would sit beside me as I wrote, never reading, just being. Like their presence alone was permission, and I think that's what healing often looks like. Not thunder, not fireworks, but someone simply sitting beside you without asking you to hurry. One night, we found an old swing in a quiet playground long after midnight, the city asleep, and for once, so was my anxiety. Jules took the swing next to mine. We didn't speak, we just swayed back and forth, our shadows stretching long in the moonlight. Felt like flying, like we were both children again before the world told us we were too much, too sensitive, too complicated. I remember thinking, this is what peace feels like, not the absence of pain, but the presence of love that doesn't run from it. There were days when I still unraveled, still wanted to hide, still questioned my worth, and Jules never forced me out of those caves. They just lit a lantern and waited at the entrance until I was ready to come back. That's love. That's real, that's rare. One morning I woke to find a small note tucked under my coffee cup. In Jules' crooked handwriting, "Today is a day you don't have to prove anything." I read it 3 times, letting it soak into the parts of me still stuck in performance, still tangled in old definitions of worth. And that day, I let myself just be unaccomplished, unpolished, unashamed. Felt like rebellion, but it was really just return to myself, to the truth Jules had been holding for me all along. You don't have to be fixed to be loved. There were still nights when I couldn't sleep, still dreams that woke me up in tears, still spirals that felt too wide to escape. I never felt alone in them again, because even if Jules wasn't beside me physically, their voice lived inside my memory, the way they'd say, "Let the feeling come and let it pass. You're not wrong for feeling deeply." That voice, soft and sure, became my own over times. Lowly, quietly, I began to believe what they believed about me, that I was worthy exactly as I was. No edits, no upgrades. Once asked Jules, "Why do you love me this way?" And they said, "Because it's the kind of love I needed." Once that stayed with me long after the words faded, because it wasn't just love. It was legacy, a quiet inheritance passed from one heart to another. We kept walking through life together, not always side by side, but never apart in spirit. Every time I stumbled, every time I forgot, every time I doubted, they were there. Not with answers, but with presence, and somehow that was always enough. The world didn't change, but I did, and that was enough. Walked differently now, not taller, but steadier. Like my bones had remembered something ancient and true. It wasn't that the storms stopped. It was that I no longer feared them as I once did because I knew somewhere, even in the deepest thunder, there was someone who wouldn't leave. Someone who wouldn't flinch at my lightning jewels taught me that, without fixing, without formulas, just presence. Just listening, just love. Why think about that often? How they never tried to change me, never handed me a map, just stood beside me while I made my own end. Still they celebrated every quiet mile. I walked as if I had climbed mountains, as if I had done the impossible to them. Maybe I had. One evening we sat watching the sun fold itself into the sea, the sky a painting. No one could recreate the kind of silence that doesn't ask to be filled. Jules turned to me and whispered, "I hope you know I never saw you as broken. That stayed with me, it still does, because somewhere inside I had believed I needed repair, like my soul was a house with too many cracks, too many rooms closed off, too many ceilings that had caved in. But they walked through every hallway, lit a candle in each room, sat with me in the dust, and never once asked me to tear the place down, only to live in it, love it, make it mine again. Little by little, I stopped apologizing for the parts that were still healing. I stopped shrinking to fit into spaces that required silence over truth, and, maybe the most beautiful thing, I began to offer others the same kind of love Jules gave me, the kind that doesn't rush, the kind that doesn't rescue, the kind that simply remains, because I had learned love is not the solution, it is the soil, and when we are planted in it, we grow in ways we never thought possible. I think Jules knew that from the start. That I didn't need fixing, I needed space, safety, stillness. I needed someone to say, "I see you," without adding, "and here's how to change." One day a friend sat beside me, eyes wet, voice trembling, and said, "But I feel like I'm too much," and without thinking I reached for their hand, looked at them the way Jules once looked at me, and whispered, "You're not too much, you're just not in the right story yet." And I realized then that Jules' love had not only healed me, it had multiplied, spilled over, became a current moving through me to others. That's what real love does. It never ends where it begins. It echoes. Sometimes I still have days where I forget, where the old stories return, where I fall back into silence. But now I have a voice inside that gently says, "You don't need to be anyone else. You are not a problem. You are a poem." And when I close my eyes, I see Jules still sitting there, still holding the light, still saying nothing, because sometimes the truest love needs no words, only presence, only patience, only peace. We never said goodbye, because there was nothing to leave. The love had woven itself into the fabric of who I had become. Even now, when I laugh, when I cry, when I sit in silence, I can feel it, that quiet, unfixing, unshaking, unconditional kind of love, the kind that doesn't save you, it lets you save yourself and walks beside you every step of the way.